Kind of doubled up on the presentation, didn't we? Sorry about that. Good morning. It's good to be here with all of you. I have been really excited to come and do this and to get to see some of you again that I've met before, at least briefly, see some of you again that I have known for a long time and love dearly, and to meet a lot of you for the first time and get to know you a bit. It's such a wonderful thing for us, and I hope that it will, turn out to be just as much a blessing for all of you. Before we get into the lesson proper, I wanted to give a bit of a report on the work that I have been doing in Southwest Indiana. And I know that I send a report every couple of months, and so if you pay attention to those, then you already have at least a fair idea of the work that my family and I have been doing there for the last 3 years and change. But I should also give you a bit of an introduction to my family. Harley and I, my wife Harley, we grew up not right next to each other, but both in central Illinois, about an hour apart. And when I went off to college, I was worshiping in the town where she grew up. And so that's how the two of us met and got together, and we got married. And I, at the time, was not expecting to become a preacher. I had grown up in a congregation where I didn't realize until I was probably about 12 or 13 that there were people who preached for a living. We even had a full-time preacher for at least part of that time, so I was a little slow on the uptake. But we had so many people that were just chomping at the bit to study and to share the fruits of their study that it took me a while to realize, I guess there is one guy who preaches a little more than everybody else. And that really stuck with me. My dad did a lot of sort of appointment preaching. He was never a preacher for his living, but he filled in an awful lot at home. And he would go to some smaller congregations here and there, sometimes once or twice a month, and preach for them. And so that certainly stuck with me, and I knew that I wanted to at least do that, but I wanted to earn my living in some other way. And I kind of looked at engineering, and I tried that for a little while, and I decided, I don't like this, so I'm going to change my major. And I went to something completely useless, classics, where I was studying Greek and Latin. It's not actually completely useless, but most people would look at it that way. And right about the time that I was deciding I did not want to be in academia all my life, there was a sort of an opening in the church where Harley had grown up and where I had been worshiping now for several years, as the preacher wanted to retire. And I was at sort of a crossroads in thinking, what do I want to do? How do I want to earn my living? And how do I want to serve the Lord and work in His vineyard? And it was like all of the signs were pointing in the same direction. Here it is, Jeremy. And so I decided, well, I've got to at least take this opportunity, help out where I can, and for as long as I can, and see whether I'm any good at this. And if you ask the people around me, they probably would have said he's not any good at this. But I don't know that it's necessarily that I disagreed, but I kept at it, kept working at it, and I preached part-time there in Rantoul, Illinois, for about a couple of years, and then we moved out to Nebraska to work with the church in Lincoln, and that's where we met Mark and Tracy and their wonderful family, and just fell in love with their family. And it was only for a few months, and then because they were driving just an obnoxious distance to get to us, and they were having such success with a liberal group there in their own town in getting them to understand some of the mistakes that they were making, that they felt like we ought to do this full time. And so that was very bittersweet for us. I was thrilled to see what they were accomplishing, and I was really irritated to be losing them on a weekly basis. And we certainly worked to maintain the relationship that we had with their family, and have just adored their family, watched their kids grow up all the way, and have been thrilled to see everything that happens. Every time we come back, it seems like John is another foot taller. Eventually, after several years in Nebraska, it was time for us to move on. We worked our way to Indiana, specifically the Evansville area, a little town outside of Evansville called Newburgh. And that was right at the beginning of the year 2020, which was just in time for COVID. Excellent timing, obviously, to start work with a new group where you don't really know anybody and they don't know you. And now you're left dealing with some of the most contentious issues that the churches have faced, certainly in our lifetime. So we did our best to weather that whole mess. But what we had found in Newburgh was a congregation with a lot of families that were roughly our age and younger. Not this many, but a lot by our standards. And then there was about a 20-year age gap, and then an older generation. And one of the biggest concerns that we had found when we went and visited the congregation to see if it might be a good fit for them and for us, our biggest concern was that there was kind of a soft division between those two camps. And that was hard to see. That was hard to imagine how we would deal with that exactly. And we didn't see it getting better on its own. We weren't sure how this church was going to fare. And it seemed like a lot of those young families that were also young in the faith were not on the firmest foundation. And that was a lot of the reason that we decided to move there and to work with that congregation. It was a good fit for us as well. So I'm not saying that we were being completely selfless. Oh, we were being selfish. But I've always maintained the mentality that I don't want to go and work with a congregation that does not need me. And so we found one that needed, not just me, but needed my whole family. And it was something that would be good for us as well. When we moved there, the church included quite a few kids who were 6 and under at the time. I guess now they're about 9 and under. We found also an extensive system of outreach avenues that were already in place, and since that is my greatest weakness in this work, I just felt like I had no idea how to start a lot of these things. And here, somebody's already built up a system, and I just have to learn that and figure out how to fit into it. And so I set about learning how to produce a weekly TV program that is preaching the gospel, and a weekly radio show, how to run a basic correspondence course and get some value out of that and help to teach people over the mail even, how to create a weekly bulletin that's not just for the members, but that gets sent out to a number of people in our community and even beyond that as well. And of course, we also had to get to know our membership and build relationships and trust and love, and do our best to start bridging that gap that we had seen. And as I said, we moved there just in time for COVID. And so we had the same challenges, or similar challenges at least, to everywhere else. I know that you all had to weather those things just like we did. And I'm very glad to say that after 3 years of working with this congregation, there's definitely fruit. The fellowship amongst the members, the old and the young, is much, much stronger. There's still room to grow. We're still working on it. It's a lot better. We have more kids now. This is not exactly my doing, but there have been something like 8 births since we moved there, and I would like to think that the encouragement of seeing my gigantic family has helped people at least to be willing to take that plunge, even if they were on the fence before. The congregation is, by your standards perhaps, fairly small. It's about average, I think, nationwide. It's about 55. The attendance is about 55 on the average Sunday. Nearly half of those are under the age of 18, which is a good problem to have. It's definitely a problem. It definitely takes a lot of work, a lot of thinking and ingenuity. It's a wonderful problem to have, and I have loved being a part of that and stressing to the members of this church that, guys, your biggest evangelistic opportunity is already right here in the building. We can't take for granted that they're all going to turn out just fine. We have to put work into it. And I suppose that's a bit of foreshadowing into the lesson we're going to get into in a few moments here. But it hasn't all been an inward focus. As I mentioned earlier, I've been doing a TV show and a radio program and articles that I've been writing for even members of the community. We've gotten a lot of contacts, especially from that TV show. In one case, it was very simple. This was very early on in COVID, and a guy just called the church's number, got in touch, and asked to be baptized. And I went, wow, that was easy. Now, of course, I have some questions for you before we're going to go through with this, but he answered all of my questions, and I said, okay, well, I feel like I'm in Peter's position. Who can withhold water to baptize this guy? And that was amazing. It was encouraging. Of course, it was also COVID, and so I'm not sure that anyone else except for my family even ever got to meet this guy. And he he had decided that he was going to move south, partially to get away from. He was a little concerned about the virus, and he wanted to be closer to his family, and he wasn't too thrilled with being around a lot of people. And so pretty soon he moved to Florida, and that was somewhat frustrating. A lot of the fruit that I have seen from my work has kind of been like that. We get to see it blossom and grow and then go somewhere else. We've had instances like that where we lost people because of jobs. They just had to move somewhere else, jobs or family situations, and some of my favorite people had to go away. And I've thought about slashing some tires to keep them there a little longer, but I decided that wouldn't be the right way to handle it. Unfortunately, we've also had some instances where people left because they didn't like me. The previous preacher had been there for 13, 14, 15 years, something like that, and it was difficult for them to deal with that change. And I'm certainly not going to say that I handled everything perfectly either. It was nice that there is a church across town. They were at least able to go and find a sound church that was very close by. And we've had a couple of people who came back in the other direction. I don't know if it's because they didn't like Curtis or what, but Curtis and I at least have a good relationship, and we've done our best to maintain that and not let the issues between some of our members get between us or get between the congregations as a whole. There are challenges. There are challenges everywhere. The particular challenges for me in my work, a lot of it just comes from the fact that there's so much to do. So much to do, and I also have kind of a big family. And it's a challenge for me to give everybody and everything the attention that it deserves and requires. Distractions pop up constantly, but I keep reminding myself to pay attention to the things that are most important. Keep reminding myself about that shared purpose that Ryan was trying to illustrate, and he was succeeding very much in illustrating in our class this morning. This is all for the glory of God. Overall, I'm very pleased with the progress that we have seen in Newburgh, and with the continued opportunities that keep arising to build in God's house. And I can't thank you all enough for the generous support that you have provided. The increase that we see belongs to you as much as to us. Since I have been there, I did something that I hadn't done before. I started making up yearly themes for my preaching. And it's not like, everything for the whole church has to be focused on this thing for the year. But I wanted some kind of a clear thread to guide me through the year, so that on those few occasions where I'm trying to decide what am I going to preach about on Sunday, I can go back to that theme and think, well, what's the next step that we need to take on that theme? And I try to select the themes based on what the congregation needs, or at least what I think the congregation needs. And what I thought that the congregation needed at this stage to look at deeply over the course of this year is the family. We talked a lot about spiritual family in class this morning. And we've done a lot of that actually in the congregation in Newburgh over the last couple of years, but we've got all these young physical families, and they're figuring out how to go about their lives, how to fulfill their roles, how to behave in this world in a way that is pleasing to God. And so that's what we have been focusing on. And that brings us back to that slightly bizarre reading from Numbers 30. What was going on with that? In the Bible and in history, we often, and sometimes in the present, very often in the present really, we often see the lowly being mistreated by the strong. And very often we see women being mistreated by men most of the time. And now we read here in Numbers 30 that their promises are subject to some man's approval. Doesn't that seem weird? Does God think that women aren't smart enough to understand what they're saying? Is it that in the same way that we don't allow children to sign contracts that are binding because they can't meaningfully consent to those sorts of things? Is it the same with women? They're not smart enough either? They don't know what they're doing? Or maybe it's just a reflection of the inherent rampant misogyny of the society, and it's fun for men to exercise this capricious power over women, and that God is giving them free rein to do so. Is that it? Of course not. We get a hint in verse 15 of Numbers 30. This is whether it's the father or the husband, it makes no difference. But if he makes them, that is her promises, null and void after he has heard of them, meaning after he's heard of them and didn't say anything about it, and then later he steps in and says, no, you're not doing that. Then what? Then he shall bear her iniquity. What does that mean? Earlier up in that reading, it was talking about how if a woman's father or her husband hears of a vow that his wife or his daughter has made, and he immediately vacates it and says, no, then God's not going to hold her accountable for it because he didn't permit it. Now, if he doesn't do that, if he lets it stand in that moment and then later vacates it, well, somebody is in trouble here because her vow stands. So who's in trouble? Because now her husband is getting in the way and not letting her, or her father, not letting her carry out her vow. So who's in trouble? It's not her. It's him. He shall bear her iniquity. Keep that in mind. And then let's flip over to Ephesians chapter 6. We've got a start in an Old Testament perspective. Now let's think about a New Testament perspective. Let's read verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Simple. Everybody probably remembers these verses. Simple enough. Children, obey your parents, yada, yada. Of course, the fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. Did you notice there's a shift there? We're talking about family dynamics and how they're supposed to behave toward each other. And it says, children, obey your parents. And then he doesn't say, fathers do not provoke, or he does rather say, fathers don't provoke your children to wrath. He doesn't say parents. He shifts to fathers. He doesn't just say, children, obey your fathers. He says, your parents. That's the generic, both the fathers and the mothers. But as far as who's not supposed to provoke them to wrath, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord, he singles out the fathers there. Now, is he saying that the mothers don't have to do that? No, of course they have a role to play as well, but who is liable? Who is at core responsible for it? It's the fathers. Fathers and mothers have different roles. We're not interchangeable, despite what a lot of people want to say today. And we can see an example of this in one of Paul's very early letters, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. And he's talking about a spiritual analogy here. He uses the physical relationship between parents and their children to demonstrate something spiritual. And he says, let's read beginning in verse 7. But we were gentle among you like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. So he's comparing himself and Timothy and Silas and the spiritual work that they were doing with these brand new Christians and saying that our role was like the role of a mother. Mothers do literally and figuratively give of themselves, especially in the act of nursing. That is mind-boggling in the spiritual lessons that it provides for us. And the affection is a core focus for the relationship between mother and children. And Paul's not even instructing them. He's not even saying, mothers, this is how you should behave. He's just recognizing the obvious fact. But he didn't only fulfill the role of a mother to these new Christians, he also fulfilled the role of a father, which is somewhat different. Let's keep reading. Verse 9. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We worked night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. That's not quite the same thing, is it? And again, I'll remind you, he's not saying this is how fathers are to behave toward their children. He's recognizing this is how fathers do behave toward their children, and this is what we were doing spiritually for you. So we've got mothers who give of themselves, we've got mothers who show affection, and we've got fathers who toil night and day. They act as examples, they exhort, they encourage, and they charge. It's a little more forceful than the others. So we've talked a lot about father and children. We've talked about mother and children. But it's not just about fathers and mothers. We've also got another relationship there between the husband and the wife. And wouldn't you know it, Paul talks about that a fair amount too. Let's turn to Ephesians chapter 5. We already looked at children and parents in chapter 6, but if we back up to the latter portion of chapter 5, we can see him discussing husbands and wives. We'll begin reading in verse 22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, and he keeps on going for really the entire rest of the chapter there. So if we're thinking about fathers specifically, which is really what I'm trying to get at in our lesson this morning, then well, your husbands and fathers' role, that's going to show up in that later portion, but there's plenty for husbands to learn in the instructions that he gives to the wives. You realize that? Wives, submit to your own husbands. The husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Husbands, you're supposed to be the head of your household. Are you? I hope so, but it's difficult when we live in a society that does not like this. We live in a society that really, really hates this idea. What concern of ours is society's approval? Society didn't approve of these early Christians. They had an awful lot of them executed or eaten by the beasts in the arena. Why would we expect any different when we adhere to Christ's commands? We follow Christ, not society. We follow the Spirit of God, not the spirit of the age. How does Christ handle his household? Is that an egalitarian marriage in which they both have an equal say on everything, in which they have exactly the same roles to fulfill? Not so much. It's very clear. The church is the bride of Christ, and we better know he's in charge. His say is final. Now, that doesn't mean that husbands ought to be tyrants. They certainly shouldn't be. They also shouldn't be simps. You need to be in charge of your household. That doesn't mean that you need to micromanage everything. A good leader delegates an awful lot. But even when you delegate, and this gets back to another thing that Ryan was pointing out in class this morning, the buck stops with you. And if there's a failure, part of that failure is yours. You are responsible for what happens in your household. And you can't put all the blame on your kids for not understanding something. You can't put all the blame on your wife for not understanding something or implementing it correctly. You're in charge. The buck stops with you. It's your responsibility. And very often in Christian households, at least in my observation, and you can tell me later if it's different for you, but I think that this is more commonly the issue. It's not that wives are trying to take over and be in charge, and then husbands just don't want to deal with the fight, and so they let themselves be bowled over. What I have seen more often has been that husbands who are either influenced by society or just lazy or just confused refuse to lead. Well, if that's you, then I think I can probably give you a message from your wife. She wants a man, not a man-sized child, that she has to look after. And this is not a new concept in the New Testament. We already saw back in Numbers 30, but we've got another thing we can look at back in Joshua chapter 4. And there's plenty of other options as well here, but I've had to pare down this lesson, and I already hadn't covered anywhere near all of the passages that we could have. But in Joshua chapter 4, let's just read verses 20 through 22. This is as the people are they're crossing the Jordan River into the promised land, and they are supposed to be creating a monument. Those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal, and he said to the people of Israel, "When your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground." Who are they asking? The fathers. It's taken for granted that the leaders of the household, physically and spiritually, are the dads. Doesn't mean that mom can't give an answer to the question. Doesn't mean that mom has no role to play. But who is ultimately accountable for it? Fathers. And we should take that lesson to heart. A couple of months ago, my wife Harley and I, after the kids had gone to bed, mercifully, we were talking late into the night. We were already behind on sleep. I think this was during Jethro's colic phase, so we weren't quite aware of our surroundings during that period, and we didn't make all the best decisions because of the lack of sleep. But here we were taking an opportunity where we could have been sleeping, and instead we were enjoying the peace and quiet and just talking. And the conversation somehow worked its way around to something that ended up being a great encouragement to me. Because Harley told me that she no longer gets stressed out about all of the little disasters that seem to come my family's way. And that was great. I thought, wow, she doesn't get stressed out. She's not worried. She trusts me. I get worried. I get stressed out. I'm barely hanging on here. But that's my burden. It's not all hers. She has a part to play. But she trusts me. And that made me feel wonderful. So why do I get worried? When I said that, are you supposed to get worried? Remember what Jesus says about worry? He says in Matthew 6, beginning of verse 25, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Okay, so we're told not to be anxious, and I'm not doing a great job at that all the time. I'll admit to that readily. I need to take those words to heart. But I'll tell you something else. As long as we're talking about Jesus, turn over to Luke chapter 22. Luke 22, and we will read verses 39 through 46. "And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, 'Pray that you may not enter into temptation.' And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, 'Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.' And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, 'Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation.'" Does that sound like anxiety to you? It sounds like anxiety to me. You could say he's anxious about his life, not about what he's going to eat or what he's going to drink or what he's going to put on his body, not his life itself. We see other examples of this. Paul tells us, don't be anxious. In everything, by prayer and supplication, make your requests be made known to the Lord. I think I might be butchering that quote from Philippians, but And yet, we see Paul talking about his own anxiety. He talks in 2 Corinthians, I think it's in chapter 13, as he's going through the list of trials that he suffers. And he says, on top of all that is the daily anxiety that I hold for all the churches. So what is it? Paul and Jesus himself can't practice what they preach? No, that's not the point. The idea is that, of course, anxiety is going to come. Now, what do you do with it? And we do exactly what Jesus does, exactly what Paul does. We cast our cares on the Lord. That's what Peter tells us to do in 1 Peter 5. He can handle it. He can carry it when we can't. But as far as this world is concerned, in the flesh, and for our spiritual well-being, the relationship that we have with God, the relationship of our families with God, the weight falls on me and my family. It falls on the husband, the father, in your family. It's my job to see that they are all protected, both spiritually and physically. It's my job to provide for them, spiritually and physically. It's my job to fix what is broken, spiritually and physically. There's kind of a running theme here. It's my job to plan for the future. It's my job to pursue those plans. It's my job to teach them, to correct them, and to set them on the path toward heaven. To not feel that weight on a daily basis would be to minimize the greatest responsibility that anyone has ever given me or will ever give me. This is huge. It should feel heavy. We've got Psalm 127 up on the screen, and I love this psalm. I loved it even before I had a quiver full of children, but now that I do, it means so much more. The latter part of the psalm, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. I shot a lot of archery when I was a kid. Never all that good. I didn't have much of a teacher. I didn't really have any teacher, just myself and whatever I could find that was written on the subject that I could easily access. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a junky little fiberglass bow and junky little fiberglass arrows. No idea what I was doing. I just wanted to be Robin Hood. That was all. A while back, a couple of years ago, I got back into archery again for a while until I ran out of time because I had more pressing issues in my family that I was responsible for. It helped that my dog wouldn't stop tearing my backstop apart, but that was kind of a secondary concern. And because I'm kind of an oddball, I didn't go the easier route of the really fancy, just fantastic compound bows that are available today with the super stiff arrows and the perfect center shot and all these like drop-away rests and clickers and release aids and all of that. There's probably at least a handful out there who have hunted and do some archery, and so you're familiar with all that stuff. Even with all of that, archery is hard. And because I like to make things harder, I shot traditional bow, where it's a stick, a string, and an arrow. And through that, I came to have a much better appreciation of the metaphor in this psalm. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. If you've ever done archery and you've lost an arrow, oh, that hurts. And today, you can just go buy another one that's basically the same. Not so much in Solomon's day. Didn't work that way. Making arrows is really difficult. And you have to make them the same. You have to make them so they all act the same. So they all not just look the same, but they all perform the same. They need to be the same weight. They need to be the same stiffness. They need to have the fletchings in the same point, the same distance from the head and from the nock. They need to have the same tension on the nock. There are so many details that you have to think about. And you start obsessing over all of these tiny little inputs, every possible stop along the way, and you haven't even shot a single arrow yet. You're just trying to build a few that you can eventually shoot. And then once you get to the point of shooting, you discover that that's not all that easy. And every single thing that you do, from your stance to your muscular and skeletal structure, to which particular muscles are in tension at any given time, to how you're breathing, to how long you hold it back, and a slew of other things. Everything matters. And then you come to the pinnacle, the purpose for which you went through all of this. You release that arrow. And all you can do is watch. There's nothing you can do now to affect where it's going to land. We build up our children like we build up our arrows. We have to obsess over all those details. How are they going to fly? Are they going to land where I shoot them? A lot of damage can be done if you miss. And when you see that arrow going high, hasn't hit the target yet or hasn't gotten to the target yet, all you can do is speed pray. So how do you get them to land where you want? How do you get your kids to land where you want? How do you get them to land where the Lord wants? It's going to take a lot of work. Ideally, you would also like to get them back undamaged and be able to shoot them again and again and again and again. Ideally, you'd like to keep these arrows forever. So we have to build them up for care. We have to not take anything for granted. We need to monitor their condition constantly, fix what is broken the best we can, protect them as much as we can without just rendering them useless for their intended purpose. You know, a great way to never damage an arrow is never shoot one. But then what good is it? If it's going to be any use at all, then you're going to have to set it loose at some point. Most of all, you have to practice firing them. And the ideal way to do that is to start easy. Especially when you're doing it the hard way like I was. You start 3 feet from the target. You can't miss. Make it nice and easy. The arrow's not an issue there. It's me. I'm the one who has to worry about this. I'm the one who has to build up my form. I'm the one who has to figure out how to send the arrow off. And then as I get better at that, and as I get better at adapting my arrows, I can get a little farther and a little farther and a little farther, and I can expect more out of myself and out of the arrows. We do the same thing with our kids. We better if we want to spend eternity with them in heaven. Do you think that you're going to hit the bullseye from 100 yards away with that one most important shot if you've never picked up the bow before? It's not going to happen. God expects an awful lot from fathers and from husbands. Why? Well, if we go back and think about that initial reading in Numbers 30, we think about the burden that the father or the husband carries there. How he has to worry even about his daughter's or his wife's vow and decide in each and every case whether he's going to hold them to that, whether he's going to uphold that, their purpose, or whether he's going to stop them and say, no, you're not doing that. It wasn't even his idea in the first place. Why is it up to him? And yet God gives him this burden, and it's because it's the burden that God himself bears for each one of us. He carries that weight. And he wants you, fathers and husbands out there, to man up and get a taste of what it's like. So ultimately, we look at him as our example. We emulate him in our own families. And having done that, we should probably show him some more appreciation and some more respect and some more faithful obedience. The weight of your family rests on you. It's your job to carry it. But as we saw in the case of Jesus, as I alluded to in the case of Paul, we can get a lot of help because we can throw that weight on God. We don't have to concern ourselves with making all the decisions. We just have to concern ourselves with implementing God's decisions. Put him in charge of your household. Worry about his policies and his standards, because he knows better than you do. He's the Father that we're all supposed to be. But more than that, he's not just being an example father. He wants to be a father to each and every one of us. And he has one and only begotten Son, Jesus. But he's looking to adopt a whole lot more than that. Are you one of these adopted children of God himself? If you're not, then you don't get to expect the blessings of God as a father. If you are, then that means you're going to have to worry about pleasing your Father, obeying his instructions, not earning his love. That's never going to happen. But he has a right to tell you what to do. And he's looking to adopt, as I said. So if you're not a member of his family and you want to join it, he has more than enough love for all of us. And this would be a good time to join his family, to submit yourself to the best father that you could ever hope for. If you need to take those steps today, then I encourage you to come now as we stand and sing.